Leadership development exists because none of us are perfect, fully realized people. We all have room for growth in our lives, and we need help along the way. Hi, and welcome to Developing Imperfect Leaders.
Because the last time I checked, we're not Jesus.
This podcast is a project of the Leadership Development Institute at Hope Community Church, intended to help you explore and grow your leadership skills for service both inside and outside the church. I'm your host, Paul Stiver, and I'm joined by my co-hosts and fellow LDI staff team members, Kaelyn Larson.
Hello.
And Naty Severson.
Hey.
So we're going to start with this episode is actually a little different than our normal format. We're going to recap the previous 3 episodes, which again were a live recording of an LDI seminar titled Developing Female Leaders. And we had a panel of women come and answer a series of questions, and we learned from them and kind of heard more about what it's like to integrate the gospel as a female leader, whether you work inside the church or outside the church. And now we're going to kind of just spend some time, the 3 of us, recapping kind of our takeaways from it and some other thoughts that we had coming out of that seminar. But before we get into that, Naty has got us with another Would You Rather.
Yes, would you rather? Well, I just recently got back from sunny Florida, and while I was down there, I got to see a couple things happen. First, I got to see a SpaceX launch.
Whoa.
That's Elon Musk's thing, right?
Yeah, yep. So
He was on it? All right.
no, I think there were like 26 satellites on it, though.
Wow.
And that was fun. And then later in the week, my daughter and I actually spent the entire day, we shut the place down at Kennedy Space Center.
Wow.
And we didn't get to see everything. So it was really...
It's that big?
Yeah, it was
I
way
didn't realize
more
that.
elaborate.
Wow.
I mean, and it's still, the museums are like
Mm-hmm.
right near where they, like everything
Mhm,
happens, where they launch the things and the things, the shuttles, and they don't actually launch shuttles anymore.
For those who aren't watching online and are listening, Natty's actually wearing a NASA hat.
I did buy this hat there.
We're not currently sponsored by NASA,
Yeah,
but
no.
hopefully down the road.
Yeah, that could be something we could
Yeah.
work on. I think the government often sponsors religiously based podcasts. I think that's
Last
totally
I
a thing.
checked.
Yeah. So, would you rather? Now, this is an experience. Would you rather? So, would you rather spend 8 days at an all-inclusive resort, like of your choosing, or spend 8 days flying to the moon, landing on the moon, and coming back?
I mean,
Yep.
Look, I've never done an all-inclusive resort. The videos I always see is like people that love to drink, and then by their joke is that by like the 3rd day, you're just like so tired of drinking that heavily. But
Yeah, I've done it, and I have never done it in the heavy drinking category,
right.
and I still have loved it.
yeah, so
Yep.
I mean, the food.
It could be at like a Fijian all-inclusive.
Is the food good?
The food is good. Yeah, no, you can. The food was good at the ones I've been to.
I mean, that's great. I would love the idea of 8 days of kind of rest and relaxation.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by the question. So if you're
great.
thrown by the all-inclusive thing, it could be like an 8-day luxury vacation.
Right. It's like
how about that?
No, but that makes it's very tantalizing, especially as a parent of young kids, the idea of every, kind of request, need, food, drink being handled by
They
the resort.
anticipate your needs. That's what's crazy about it.
And yet, going to the moon, and you said getting out and walking on the moon?
You get to Neil Armstrong the thing.
Yeah, I mean,
Neil Armstrong the moon.
you still, I mean, thousands of people go to all-inclusive resorts every day. How many people have been on the moon? Probably under a few hundred. I actually should.
Maybe
Probably
only
under
4.
20.
Maybe only 4.
How many? Austin's going to look it up. How many people have actually been on the moon?
How many, I was thinking Americans, how many human beings have been on the
Either
moon?
way, though, I'm choosing moon. That's awesome and would be epic. And I could just always go to an all-inclusive resort later. I could never go
back to the moon.
Hey, guys, is that offer?
Yeah, is that a lifetime offer
Anyway.
then? Kaelyn?
12?
Yeah,
12 human
And
beings.
you under
How
20?
many Americans have been on the moon? Can you look that up?
I am choosing an all-inclusive resort because I recently watched...
Kaelyn, it's the moon.
Okay.
12 people.
12. Okay, 12 Americans. Yeah, so I recently watched Apollo 13 because...
It's the best movie for being an oldie but a goodie.
It was. And so growing up, it came out when I was 5 or 6. So I'd
For real? That's how old that movie is?
in the 90s.
I do remember being a little kid watching
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
And so then watching that movie, I was like, why would anyone want to go to space? Never.
Oh,
I
yeah.
would
I mean,
freak
if you're
out.
interpreting it through the lens of like
All the things that could go wrong.
near-death experiences
Yeah,
and terror,
yeah, no.
I think,
No, would not.
typically
would
they
not.
make movies more dramatic.
I recently went to an all-inclusive resort and I loved that there was like 10 meals. We didn't have to do anything. They just brought us our food. They cleaned up after us. And I got
That's
to lay at the pool. It was awesome. I would do that again in a heartbeat.
Yeah, 100% would go to the moon. I mean,
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I picked this knowing perfectly well what you would each say.
Yeah.
And it was funny because you each have little kids, so I'm like, ooh, the all-inclusive is going to be extra tantalizing because you have little kids and you're like, no one crying for 7-8 days would be just amazing, right? I 100% would go. Had I had the stuff to be an astronaut, would have done it. 100%.
Never.
Yeah.
I think I'd throw up on
Oh,
the takeoff.
it's really
develop the
apparently
ability.
I listened to an astronaut. He talked to me and a a large group of people. And he said it wasn't that bad. He said there's more G's exerted on you on a roller coaster than when you launch in a shuttle.
Yeah, I can't do roller coasters anymore.
Okay. We just knock you out so you could make it up.
Yeah.
All right. Enough of that.
All right,
Enough of
speaking
that.
of going to the moon, that has no transition at all related to what we're talking about. So
It
again,
is there was like a women in space exhibit at the.
How many
there you
women
go.
have been?
Not a lot.
Yeah.
No women has ever touched the surface of the moon.
Well, because the Challenger, were they going to the moon?
No.
They were just going into space.
They were just going into
Kaelyn,
space.
you
The shuttles, I don't think ever
you're
went to the moon.
choosing an all-inclusive resort over that next level of women's advancement and not walking on the moon.
Yes.
Thankfully, Natty's going.
Neither a person of color or a woman as of now, as
Okay.
of this recording, and it won't unless another country does something. It won't be until like 2026. I think they're
There's,
actually
like,
going to
no
get back
plans.
to the moon, and then it'll be a more inclusive group of
Didn't
people.
something just blow up on the moon?
I think a rocket tipped over,
Oh.
like a lander tipped over, not a rocket.
Those astrology? Yeah.
Astrology.
Right? Is that right? Or astronomy?
Astrology's
I tried
like,
my
I'm a
best.
Virgo.
I literally
I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
what is he
Well,
talking
both.
about?
Astronomy buffs are loving this banter so far. They're
Oh
big
my
fans.
gosh. My daughter works at a planetarium. She's full astronomy
I didn't know
nerd.
that. That's
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, she's a star guide.
A star guide. At first, I thought you said star god. And I was like,
No.
a guide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
All right. Another terrible segue opportunity here. So
You could have segued it
I
with
could have done
the
way
women on the.
Yeah, we could have done it with
Yeah,
women in
yeah.
space,
Yeah.
but yeah.
no need to rehash what things I could have done better. But speaking of that, let's rehash and talk about the Developing Female Leaders Seminar. So if you're just tuning in for this episode, go back, listen to the previous 3 episodes and kind of take in that content that came from the seminar. Again, we live recorded and interviewed Naty and Kaelyn were on the panel, and then 3 other women who actually are leaders outside of the walls of hope. So kind of in the marketplace. And we asked just a number of questions. And out of that conversation, a lot of things came up. But I just want to ask you guys, and I have some thoughts as well, but what are 1 to 2 things from the seminar that are sticking with you and why?
I think the first thing that I noticed was, and if you go back and listen to it, I didn't realize when I was envisioning the recording, I didn't think it would go as long as it did. So it was really neat. And I think we all sort of were trying to be respectful of time, and yet it still went longer than I thought it would be. It was right in our planned window of time, but I'm like, I don't know if we're going to make it. But we did. But one of the things that occurred to me after it was done was how much we actually talked about the workplace, whether it was working in ministry or being a part of a ministry, because those gals all serve in ministry roles, but they don't work in ministry, but also their jobs. And it felt like gender issues came up the most, or at least the things they were excited to talk about was how it related to their, like essentially their 9-to-5 jobs, their weekday, they're not, whatever. I'm sure they work more than just the weekdays, but they're regular jobs. And I haven't taken time, I don't think, to learn from women who are in jobs outside of ministry, because I think of we talk to each other, Kaelyn and I, about the unique challenges of being women in ministry roles, in church roles, as we attend conferences that can be dominated by men and male opinion and different things like that. But I think of workplace issues with gender as being 1970s and 80s, but that's just not true. But based on their experience, that's not true, and it makes me have it increased my already high level of respect for women in all sorts of professions. But also I was thinking back to being a woman in my mom in the workplace in the 70s and 80s and what she must have been up against in her roles. Or in their roles. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that quickly, it was interesting then the contrast, and I think it has a lot to do with Naty, your kind of leadership at Hope and the way you've changed culture here. But it was interesting. I would think the workplace would similarly be maybe a little more further along on some of the kind of the issues and the conversations than it seemed like came out of the panel at times. And so I actually saw kind of a beautiful contrast with Hope and at least the culture here as far as a church and kind of equipping, empowering women, thinking about that. I actually was surprised a little bit coming out of the conversation about that, and just encouraged then by the culture at Hope, and I think it's a huge credit to the women that are here, kind of helping to create that culture. But yeah, it was just kind of very interesting to see the different contrasts. And
yeah, go ahead, you.
I was gonna say I wonder too. One of the gals was saying she almost has to create policy or however you want to phrase that around maternity leave, because her industry is very male dominated. But then if it's a more equal playing field of men and women, then that bar has kind of already been set. And so the others who are in a more equal playing field, perhaps it's nothing that they have to do. So some workplaces might be more 70s and 80s, hasn't this been resolved? And then some are a little more modern and kind of up to date.
And I don't mean to minimize the struggle for women. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, you just rolled your eyes at me because I said 70s and 80s, I don't live under a rock.
Yeah.
But, it's always, it's that constant thing when we talk about issues of any discriminatory issues that it's never resolved. Sin is always sin, right? We're always going to be battling against sin in every area of our life. And so it's never going to be fully resolved. But again, I would have thought the marketplace would have been further along, especially because I think the church can get so stuck in its ways sometimes. And, when you talk about the different theological understandings between different churches, ranging from really traditional or even patriarchal to egalitarian, and then an unhealthy, feminist, women are better than men. That whole range, when you talk about that, you add that layer of theology in there that makes people extra set in place. You'd think the church would be a more volatile place. So it really comforted me to hear the women on the panel have a really good experience thus far with being women in leadership at a church, because I think it can be dicey. Theological understandings can make people do and say weird things and not listen and see challenges to understanding and ask for clarity as threats rather than just a good way to create clarity and understanding, right?
One thing that stuck out to me, or I guess I've been thinking about, is how each of us have different experiences when it comes to being women in the workplace. And so my experience is very different than my peers who are on the panel with us. Because I'm working in a church and they're working in a marketplace, and just the work environment is very different. But then even for us two who work in the same environment, our experiences are different because of your longevity versus me just kind of entering or in the middle of ministry work. And so how because of your leadership has made my work here, or me being a female, a little more easier. I haven't bumped up against as much as you have. And so it's just, we're all experiencing this women in leadership in different ways.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
yeah, that's really good. For me, one of the things that just kind of even instantly resonated was the way that the gospel was integrated into the lives wherever women were at and whatever they were doing, the way they were bringing the gospel in. And throughout the conversation, that just kept coming up in different ways. I think the big one that a few different women on the panel would bring up was the phrase that we say at Hope pretty often, which is "I'm okay in Jesus," and just this idea that, because I've been saved by grace, because I have trusted Christ, received His righteousness, that I'm okay in Jesus. A couple ways that particularly came up that I just jotted down some notes because I just thought it was so good. One was someone said it kind of ends performance questions. And which is, gosh, how often are we just stuck looking at ourselves and saying, yeah, this is about my performance and I should either over elevate myself and feel pride or under elevate, or so to speak, and like feel ashamed or kind of defeat myself. And so that was a really cool one. And then secondly, another comment was, my identity isn't in how people see me at work. And fill it out. It was, my identity is in Christ. And so just thought to hear that from female leaders coming from the different experiences and see the gospel at work and helping them think about performance and about identity was really cool. Just the idea that, the gospel, we don't internalize our performance. Of course, we want to excel and be successful, but we don't have to make it who we are. And then secondly, just that it changes the way we think about our identity. I thought that was really cool to see from the various women on the panel.
I like that too. And just they weren't waiting for the outcome at their work environment to be perfect, to be okay in Jesus, right? They could be okay because they were okay in Jesus. They didn't need their work environment to be perfect. It's not that they shouldn't work to create a healthy workspace for women or for themselves. That's not what I'm saying. But they weren't waiting for that moment when everything was perfect at work to say, okay, now I'm okay. And it's just very American of us. And we all do it. I do it too. I'll be okay once. Fill in the blank. Yep. And when they were taking a step back from their jobs and thinking about it, it wasn't like, I'll be okay once I'm the CEO of my company, or once I'm Martha, I've performed
so many
250 eye surgeries in my own space or whatever, right. That's not what they were waiting for to measure their okayness. They were really putting that in Jesus. So that was really cool to see. Or it's not what their male coworker thinks of them or their female coworker. Sometimes women are equally as hard on other women. So I thought that was really cool too.
Yeah, and you kind of bring up or there's something about because you're not looking to your circumstances for identity, then you're it makes you more solid and kind of more rooted in what you're doing and who you are. But then I think it does equip you to change culture and kind of approach that. Because that was another thing that kind of came up throughout the conversation, was just the ways that there has to be self-advocacy and support of other women and and mentoring and some of these other things that emerge that are all things that change a culture, whether it's a workforce or a church or wherever. Really cool to see that when you're not looking at just your circumstances, but you have an identity and a righteousness coming from Jesus, that actually equips you, kind of helps empower you to be willing to step into spaces and say, here's where we could see change. Here's what could be more beneficial or things we could consider.
From that lens, you would think Christians would be better at being culture changers than maybe we have been historically. We can be a little timid, right? If we are okay in Jesus, we should be okay, being culture changers. And I'm not talking about dominating culture with making everyone, making everyone in our pluralistic society comply. That's not what I mean, but standing up for the marginalized and different things like that in ways that might make us unpopular with certain people. That's interesting. That's really cool. One of the other things I was thinking about, and it came up actually after after all the recordings were done, and I thought about it when we were standing up there, but is that we didn't include any single women. But there were a lot of single women, a lot of the women who came to watch were single women. And I heard from like right away, 3 different women who said, "Hey, I noticed you didn't have a single gal on the panel." I'm like, "Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't really anticipate how marriage would come into play in their answer, but at some point, I think each of them mentioned their marriage because we were both thinking about their like."
Except my wife.
Except Paul's wife never said. Is that true?
Yeah, and maybe Kaelyn didn't.
I don't think I did either.
Hit on it a lot.
I don't know if I did, but like it was. It's funny to see how much we're talking about then about our spouse, and it would be a unique scenario to be a female leader and not have a spouse to go home to. Because for me, if I did experience something that I can talk to Jared about in terms of like confidentiality, I will tell him. And he's just, I assume he's available to listen, that he'll listen to me, that he'll take me seriously. And I suppose if you're single, you don't always know who to land with that stuff. Like, should I tell my roommate about this? Do they want to hear about this? Which friends should I trust with this information? Will that friend then consistently be there to help me through this? So you have this unique challenge as a woman in leadership who is single. Like who do I know is going to be there to help me through this? So I think that is an interesting question to begin with. How would that have changed the dynamic? And I think if I could go, you said we can't go back in time and do those things, but if I could go back in time, I think I would be more conscious of that. So to all the single women out there who are faithfully listening, thanks. We heard you. And it'd be interesting to hear how those answers would change. And I guess I could guess a little bit how they might change, but I haven't been single for a long time. It's going to be my 25th wedding anniversary.
What?
That's insane.
I know. Honestly, it feels old. Got a kid getting married. I got a 25th wedding anniversary. I guess that makes sense when you talk about those things in conjunction. But yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on, what could have, or do you think would have changed? Can you guess any sanctified guesses about what may have changed some of the answers? I know I'm throwing you curveball questions right now live on recording.
Yeah, I think certainly, because when we picked the panel, we thought through maybe some unintended consequences, but I don't think we foresaw as many of the responses invoking, I go to my spouse for this support, like you just said. And I thought it was interesting, Elise brought up, looking to a friend or another, but I think that's helpful. And kind of to tag it, one of the things I thought came up that was another encouraging thing was the panel, women on the panel really appreciated the church. And whether it was the community they had, mentors they've had in the church, the care, hearing the gospel, and just that I'm okay in Jesus message. And I think maybe there's something to the kind of the question you bring up of where would I go with this, especially because at Hope in particular, we have a lot of female leaders in the workforce. I think there's opportunity to get plugged in, to get connected with another woman and talk through that stuff, whether it's a mentor, someone in your small group. But I think that would have definitely been one of the changes, as we would have heard more of like, well, I don't have that person to go to, so here's how I process
I've navigated that.
Yep. And so that, I think that would be, if we do another one, we would probably add one or two more.
Definitely add. But so,
But Kate, what do you think?
I was more, because I didn't get married until I was 30. And so I was thinking, okay, what was that like for me in my 20s? And I would say, I don't know if my answers would have changed too much. Because instead of going to a spouse to like process with, it probably, like Paul had said, would have been my church or small group community or mentor. And so like, I don't think my answer, because I did experience some like tough things in ministry.
Yeah, I remember.
And I had people to go to. And so like, I don't think my answers would have changed. Like the dynamic for like, of course the dynamic's going to change because it's a different person with a different perspective. But like, it's hard to know. Yeah,
it is hard to know. It's hard to guess, but shout out to the single gals out there, and we see you. You're cared about.
Yeah, and it came up to the need for more mentoring, more support within the workforce, women to women, or even women leveraging men at times that are in leadership roles to be mentors too. That I don't think that's off limits there. So just kind of it came up throughout the conversation, that kind of level of supportive mentorship, what that would take place in the workforce, but then obviously, the church providing that too.
Yeah, just the value of mentorship. I mean, we've seen various iterations of mentoring ministries here at Hope. I think right now, there's not this like specific mentoring ministry between women, but if a woman came to us, I think we could find a mentor. Yeah. And even Paul and I also work with the college ministry in addition to Leadership Development Institute here. Paul and I also work with our college ministry, and we're actively right now recruiting and setting up mentoring relationships between recent college grads and people who are a little bit ahead of them in life to like, they can ask those questions even like, how do I spend my HSA, to like, wow, I have all this free time, or wow, I don't get a summer vacation, ? Like there's all these ? I'm doing voice to text, clearly.
I have a baby over the summer.
Oh, yes. We forget all these things are happening because this will air, but if you, Kaelyn, say something so the camera will focus on you.
Hi.
Now the whole time you've been doing what?
Oh, yeah. Well, because the foot is like right here.
Baby's foot is right there. And by the time this airs, that baby will be on the outside of that stomach. But right now, probably that baby is kicking her in the liver.
Yeah.
It's my liver. It's my liver. And I'm positive it's going to be a boy. So,
that'd be so fun.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that.
No, I said girl.
You did.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Maybe I just changed live on camera.
Whoa. All right. The only other thing that I think we were going to get into and recapping was Kaelyn's personal experience on being on the seminar, and just kind of talk through that a little bit.
So I think, and before I went into the seminar, I had shared with Naty and Paul, I do not feel equipped to be on stage. I do not feel like I've had the experiences that other women have had to like feel credible, or if I have things to bring to the table. And so that is when they both get mad at me. And then...
Wait a second. We both get mad at you?
Yeah, I get mad. Naty gets supportive.
Yes.
And my being mad is an attempt to be supportive.
I'm infuriated with you.
I do use that word every time,
And then I did feel that the whole time on stage as well. Like, I don't really know what to say because, again, my experiences are far different than the other 4 women that are up here. And so I was sharing that with a couple of people afterwards, and they all were like, no, you totally like deserve to be up there, and like you share great insight and all this stuff. And so that's kind of how I felt.
Yeah, it's interesting to think how, and we could take hours to sit down and try to delineate the difference between what's a result of like your I don't know, family of origin and your personality and then gender, and try to like parse that out. But in general, I don't think men. There are men who experience a lot of lack of confidence. So I don't want to minimize guys who experience that. Our sound guy just pointed at himself. Yeah, totally. You do that, you're going to get called out, right, Austin? Yeah. But like so I don't want to minimize that, but I do think gender does play a part of that too. Women, just like we talked about in the podcast, women are less likely to apply for a job they're not qualified, or they don't believe themselves qualified for. And so Paul, when he gets mad at her, to be clear, it's a loving sort of like, it's a loving sort of like, oh, I can't believe that, you've got to stop. He's kind of, it's the same way he gets mad at sin.
Jesus.
It's the same way he gets mad at sin. You are valuable. Like he angrily tells her she's valuable. It's just, it's very big brotherly. It's actually kind of endearing. I'm more like, why do you think that?
Yeah, you're
like, tell me more about that. Curiosity,
versus
Naty.
Furiosity.
I like it.
And then we just kind of walk through. I think it's helpful. We kind of remind you of truth.
Yeah.
Of qualification of God's work in your life.
And then you say, what would you say? And then you're like, that's what you should say.
That's kind of funny how that works out.
If you didn't think you had nothing to offer, what might you offer? And then she comes up with this awesome answer, and we're like, what's the problem now? Yeah.
But really appreciate you sharing that, because that is, in some ways it's your experience, but I'm sure others can relate. And so, but overall, Any final thought on the seminar and on this topic of developing female leaders? This is an impromptu question. I'd love to hear from each of you as we kind of close the episode.
I think for me,
Kaelyn just made a great face.
Just great face.
She
Maybe we'll catch it.
She loves
impromptu questions.
Yeah.
I think for me, just a thankfulness that if you're hanging on with this whole conversation to this minute, we're probably going to wrap this up in 2 minutes, right? If you're hanging on to this topic across 4 episodes, thank you. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for taking the time, whether you're male or female. It's an important topic, I think, for men to open their eyes and sort of hear from women, and for women to have the honesty to say that, to share their struggles, and so that other women can relate with them, or even say like, wow, I've experienced something different. Here's how I feel about that. Leave your comments, on the show. We'd love to hear more about that. And just really thankful for you taking like 2 hours of your time to join us in this topic, because we think it's valuable.
I think I'm going to kind of piggyback off what Naty said was, I think it is important for men to know how women are feeling and a way to like empathize. But also I think, as Austin had pointed out, he can feel, everyone feels this way. Everyone can feel ill-equipped or not deserving of their position or whatever they might be doing. And so, but yeah, I think it is helpful for men to know how women can feel in the workplace. And so, thanks for listening.
Well, that wraps up our conversation for today, but we want to keep connecting with you. So thank you for listening to the podcast. And if you like what you heard, be sure to follow our show and leave a review. We love connecting with our listeners. So if you have questions, comments, or topic ideas, please email us ldi@hopecc.com. LDI is a ministry of Hope Community Church based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We seek to develop leaders in their biblical thinking, Christ-like character, and ministry skills for service both inside and outside the church. We do this through internships, classes, seminars, and retreats. If you're interested in learning more about our internships or other opportunities, visit ldi.hopecc.com or email ldi@hopecc.com. Have a great week.